This program is brought to you by realestate.com.au, Australia's #1 address in property. With more properties for sale than anywhere else, we make it easier.
It is good to have your company here on Business Now. Let's take you around the country and see how the housing market stood up over the weekend. And broadly, I've got to tell you, it is pretty strong. Nationally, there were 1,633 auctions. The clearance rate, you can see, was just a tick under 65%. In Sydney, 603 auctions, and the clearance rate here just under 67%. In Melbourne, there were 599 auctions, and the clearance rate around 68%. In Brisbane, 95 auctions, and the clearance rate was 65% there. In Adelaide, 53 auctions and a clearance rate of 83%, so that's strong. And in Canberra, 61 auctions, and just over 62% of them were sold. So let's bring in Eleanor Creagh, senior economist and with the REA Group. And Eleanor, one thing strikes me about all of this, it's quite different depending on which state, which city, and even which suburb you're in.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the case at the moment. We are seeing that property markets, I think, in Sydney and Melbourne are certainly warming up for the spring selling season that's coming up. We've had throughout July the number of new listings coming to market in both Sydney and Melbourne up around 9% in each capital city, which makes it the busiest July for both those markets over the past decade.
Which means good for the buyers because there's more stock sitting out there in the market, more choice, and therefore they've got an ability to figure out where they might be able to find their right selection, all that type of thing. Not bad for sellers because they're now testing a market which is actually improving and people are prepared to pay, well, in the right case, well above the reserve price.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, for buyers in both Sydney and Melbourne, I think it's going to bring a little bit more power to the negotiating table. We know that conditions have been a little more competitive in recent months, given that flow of new listings has been pretty challenged throughout the first half of 2023. But it's certainly a different conditions depending on the different capital city markets, as you pointed out.
Okay, one thing in the back of my head is that the banks have quite deliberately taken a lot of the incentive when people are taking out or refinancing mortgages off the table. So cashbacks, a range of different things. What I'm wondering is how easily people are being able to get their finance, or whether there's a case there's enough demand that the banks don't actually need to offer that incentive anymore. The people are just willing to pay if they can get their finance for the right property.
Yeah, I mean, certainly lending conditions are a little more buoyant than they were, say, this time last year when interest rates were first rising and rising at a fast pace. You know, we've approached that point where I think is very likely the peak in the cash rate is in. There's a little bit more certainty around where future borrowing costs are going to be and the like. So credit conditions are a little bit more buoyant. And certainly we are seeing that housing demand remains pretty strong. I think part of that, the very tight rental markets, encouraging people with the means to do so, to purchase maybe sooner than they otherwise would have. We've got that ongoing rebound in net migration. So certainly we're still seeing that stronger housing demand is outpacing the supply of stock coming to the market, and that's certainly the case in capitals like Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide.
I was going to say that Brisbane and Perth, you saw those clearance rates there are very high. There's clearly not the stock hitting the market at this stage, and that's surely got to, as we've seen anecdotally in your price reports, that the prices have got to be rising.
Yeah, so Perth and Adelaide, strongest performing capital city markets over the past year. Prices up a little over 5% in the past 12 months in both those markets. So price growth still remaining very robust. And we saw in July that the total number of properties for sale in Perth hit a fresh record low. So really not much choice for buyers.
Fresh record low, yeah.
Fresh record low. Really not much choice for buyers in Perth. So that's going to keep conditions a little bit more competitive. It's a similar story in Adelaide and Brisbane, where the total number of properties listed for sale at the moment is around 40% below prior decade averages. So again, not much choice in those markets for buyers.
And that's all, so the supply and demand thing, a lack of supply means that the demand is high, prices tend to go up as well. Eleanor Creagh, as always, many thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.